Hello, my name is Austin Durant and welcome to Fermentation Fact Friday. This is a new weekly series that I booted or rebooted, and we're going to talk about a specific fermentation related topic each week, and I encourage you guys to participate. So today's topic is going to be, at what temperatures should I be fermenting? And as with many things in life, the short answer is it depends. So we're going to go into all the different details about maintaining the right temperature, as well as which ferments are acclimated to specific temperatures. So if you're joining us live, welcome. If you are watching on the replay and you've got a comment, feel free to drop it in and we'll get back to you. First off, a little housekeeping. So this is Fermenters Club YouTube channel. Fermenters Club is a thing I started about 15 years ago, and our mission is to improve people's lives by teaching them why and how to ferment food, as well as to create communities that are connected through our guts. So we've got a lot of different ways for you to learn, lots of free recipes on our website, fermentersclub.com. We have online self-paced classes that are pre-recorded at Fermenters Club Academy. Live cultures, we've got a sourdough starter that's 7 years old. We've got kefir cultures, kombucha, scobies, etc. As well as we do bespoke or private workshops for folks, whether that be a nonprofit, corporate, or just a big group. We've also got a bi-weekly newsletter. You can subscribe to that. And of course, here on our YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, and share as much as you can. And I also have a cookbook called Fearless Fermenting, which is available at our website as well as on Amazon. It's got 77 recipes. It's kind of like a cookbook meets a textbook, as I like to say. So you'll learn all about food fermentation, the science behind it, what you need to do fermentation, as well as, like I said, almost 80 recipes. So check it out. All right, so let's get into microbes and temperatures. So microbes, of course, are the organisms responsible for fermentation, and they respond differently and they have different environments just like we do. So in general, microbes are more active at higher temperatures, just like us. It's also known that most fermentation styles, especially if we're talking about vegetables, happen at ambient or room temperature. And then, of course, ambient room temperature varies depending on which part of the world you're in. So some ferments, such as, let's say, tempeh or yogurt, and some cultures that are combinations of microbes, require a specific temperature range. And we'll get into what that is in a little bit. But again, those might be ambient to their environment, as in the case of tempeh, which we'll go over. So let's talk about earth temperature. So this is the natural temperature of the soil, of earth, at the ground level. And it's typically about 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 Celsius. And when we build a building that has a basement or a cellar, then as you'll notice, those are typically cool year round. That's because they're maintaining earth temperature. And these have always been great spaces in which to do fermentation. Here's an example of actually a picture from way back when. I did Sandor Katz's fermentation residency in Tennessee in 2011. And this was what the previous class had put up. He calls it kraut-chi. It's sauerkraut kimchi combination, packed into a barrel and let sit for pretty much a year in the root cellar. So that's an example of using our earth temperature as a way to manage ferments. So this is an observation that I was thinking about when I was putting together this presentation. Soil microbes, such as Lactobacillus plantarum, which is one of the main species that ferments vegetables, are actually attuned to the soil because this is their native habitat. So they are taken in by the plant and they grow in and on the plant during the plant's life. And so it makes sense that once we harvest that plant, they would be along for the ride. So these are the microbes that do fermentation, and therefore they respond to fermentation temperature, which is, again, ambient, so the soil temperature and the air temperature. Consequently, or in a different example, dairy microbes, and these are the microbes that are known to process, break down proteins and fats that are in dairy, such as Lactobacillus casei or Lactobacillus bulgaricus, which makes yogurt. Now they're attuned to warmer temperatures. So if you've ever made yogurt, you know that you have to incubate it at about 100, maybe 105 degrees, which again happens to be body temperature. And this is true because these microbes evolved in a ruminant, like a cow or a sheep or a goat, the stomach of the ruminant. And so it makes sense that they're most active at the temperatures of a body of a mammal, such as a cow or a sheep. So, and then interestingly, fungi, like we use to make things like koji and tempeh, also generate their own heat. So during their growth phase. So just interesting facts about microbes and observations. All right. So here's the chart. Again, you'll probably want to pause this and take a deep dive of the common fermenting temperatures of most common ferments. So most vegetables like sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, again, the ideal temperature range is anywhere from 55, which is earth temperature, up to 80. Kefir, which is a dairy culture, likes it to be in the again, room temperature range, 72 to 76 Fahrenheit. Things like koji, which again is a mold spore that we inoculate rice with, it tends to like things to be a little bit warmer. So we set up an incubation environment between 86 and 90 Fahrenheit. And then, as I mentioned, after about a day, it's about a 2-day process of making koji. After the first day, it's commonly known that the koji microbes themselves, the mycelium that is built, starts to generate its own heat. So interesting organism there. Kombucha, again, also likes room temperature, 68 to 80 degrees for the primary fermentation. And if you're doing a secondary bottling fermentation step, on the higher end of that range, 76 to 80, tends to be more, you'll have more success, especially if you want to build up carbonation, which is what we all do when we make kombucha. Miso, such as the red misos, the ones that take a really long time, up to a year or longer, again, anywhere earth temperature 55 to 80. Tempeh is more like koji. Again, we want to have somewhat of a warmer environment. And you can see some of the others, water kefir and yogurt. I gave the example before where yogurt likes to be at about, again, at body temperature. Now, when we're managing this stuff, it's helpful to understand what temperatures are going on. So I like to get these thermometer strips. They have adhesive backings. They're inexpensive. I buy them usually in a 10 or 12 pack. And then I like to stick them on things like my fermentation jars, my crocks, etc. In fact, I think I might have a couple here. This is one of my jars I use for vegetables. So whether that's, and also sourdough starter. So it's good to just tell you, you can kind of see right now, we're hovering around here at 76. It's a warm spring time, actually the spring equinox. So anyway, I recommend getting some of those and just sticking them on your various crocks and buckets. Now, when we're in an environment, like maybe it's still wintertime, maybe it's still cold where you are, if it's too cold, then it may seem like there's no fermentation activity happening at all. And that might be true. So if the thing that you're fermenting is within a certain range, but your ambient environment is below that temperature, again, fermentation activity will slow down if proceed at all. And that simply means it will take longer than the recommended time, which may not be an issue. In the case that I showed you where we were fermenting in a root cellar, the idea was put it up in the fall and enjoy it all the way through the spring. So time was not an issue. We were not in a hurry. So just keep that in mind. However, if it's too cold, then eventually, and the fermentation activity isn't started at all, it could expose or expose the possibility of the ferment taking on mold. So just keep that in mind. Now, the fact that fermentation is slowed down at cool temperatures, we can use that, well, we do use that to our advantage. And that's, of course, in the storage of finished ferments. So the refrigerator, as I've said before, acts as a time machine or as a super slow-mo button, slowing down the activity of fermentation without actually stopping it. So again, this is just a fact. If it's too cold, fermentation activity slows down, which is an advantage when we want to store ferments for longer periods of time, i.e. in the refrigerator. So if it's too cold in your environment, you can avail yourself of one of these very handy devices. It's called a seedling mat. If you've ever if you have a garden and you want to grow seeds when it's still cold out, you get one of these mats and you put your seedlings on top of it and you plug it into the wall, and it raises the temperature by about 10 degrees Fahrenheit or 5.5 Celsius. And I find it to be a really good tool for managing your ferments. It's inexpensive. They're usually made of vinyl, so they're easy to clean. They're an avid multitasker, which is a good thing to have in the kitchen. And so I use it in wintertime for things like brewing kombucha. So I'll roll one of these mats out onto a shelf, and I'll just put the crock, or I'll put my jar of sourdough starter if it's too cold, or whatever I'm fermenting, just set it on top, and the temperature, again, about 10 degrees, will raise up enough to get things going. So highly recommend getting one of those if you don't have one. Now, on the opposite extreme, what if it's too hot? Summertime's come around, and here in my house, it gets to be in the mid 80s. We don't have air conditioning because it's Southern California. Most places don't. We don't really need it, but there are a few weeks a year where it gets pretty hot. So we want to be mindful of that. And hotter temperatures tend to attract mold. So if you're doing a ferment and it's overly warm in your house, you want to be very mindful. You want to monitor it more closely and make sure that molds are kept at bay. Now, with vegetable fermentation, some yeast and molds forming on the top of the top layer is normal and it's okay. However, if it's just too aggressive and takes over your ferment, you may not want to consume it, or it may start to affect it negatively, like changing the texture and possibly even changing the flavor. So what you want to do is find the coolest spot in your house during warmer months, whether that be the basement or cellar, which again should be potentially earth temperature, which would be 55. The shady side of your house, which is the north side of your house if you live in the northern hemisphere, you can put stuff inside a cupboard. Again, just do your best to find the coolest environment that you can. You can also, if you want to take it to the next level, rig up an incubation chamber or maybe set up a cooler in which you put ice packs or something if you want to keep the temperature down. And I'll show you the rig that I've done in a moment here. Or basically just be mindful of what you're fermenting and maybe don't try to fight the seasons and just ferment something that's maybe more seasonally appropriate. These are all things you can do if the weather's a little too hot. Now, interestingly, there is such a thing, if you've not heard, called a kimchi refrigerator. And this is something that was developed in Korea, which is kimchi is one of the pride of the culture in Korea. So they take their kimchi very seriously, and they actually have special purpose refrigerators for both fermenting and storing kimchi. And these are a little bit different than our Western refrigerators, which are usually keep things right at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The kimchi refrigerators have different compartments that keep things a little warmer for fermentation and then maybe a little colder for storage. So check those out if you haven't. I don't have one yet, but I've already got 3 refrigerators here, so maybe that would be a little excessive. However, I love my kimchi, so if I find a good one on sale, maybe, who knows, I'll add it to my collection. So So here's my DIY incubation chamber. I've got an article to this on my website. You can see the link there, and I'll put it in the description below. So basically I took a wine refrigerator and then I repurposed it to be an incubation chamber. Now to that, I added a temperature controller, which you can kind of see up at the top here. And that temperature controller will flip on or off devices in order to manage both temperature as well as humidity. So you could add a dehumidifier or a humidifier depending on your environment. And then you use the refrigerator itself as the cooling device. And if you need to warm it up, I usually put a clamp lamp, which is with a 60-watt bulb in there to regulate the heat. So these are the different ways to regulate the environment. And so one summer when it was really warm, I wanted to make kefir, but if I made it at room temperature, which would have been 80 degrees, it would have just been, it would have not been nice. It would have been more like fizzy soda and not like the sort of creamy texture that I expected. So I got the idea to actually set my incubation chamber to 72 degrees and I put the kefir in and it turned out magically perfect. So you can use these devices once you get them set up for multiple different things. So go ahead and check out that link. So that's it. If you have any comments or questions about fermenting or experiences fermenting at different temperatures, please let me know. And again, as a reminder, check out all of our free content, our website, buy a book. I'll sign it for you if you buy it from our website. And remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time for Fermentation Fact Fridays.